All right, folks. So today, in fact, we are going to be talking about the human impact upon the environment. And when we say impact, we are referring specifically to the negative impacts upon the environment. There are, in fact, certain key influential factors I would like to focus upon. We will talk about the demography or population changes, or in fact, the population number. We'll also be talking about the affluence and the purchasing power per person, and also collectively as a community. And we'll also be talking about the technology with the progression of time. All right. It is widely believed and is widely acceptable that the impact, which is I, is in fact the product of the population change or the population number, the affluence, and also that of technology. All right, folks. When we are talking about population change, we are in fact referring specifically to the demography of any given environment. Population change is generally categorized as a potential either increase or decrease. Generally, it is 2022, and the world is said to have an estimated population as of January 2022 at 7.7 billion people, which is in fact the highest we have ever been so far. All right. Generally speaking, when we have a greater population number, all right, there are in fact greater demands for food, for services, for shelter, for clothing, you name it. This is where the affluence comes in. Affluence is inextricably linked to the purchasing power of any given individual. When people have a greater degree of affluence, they can technically purchase more, not necessarily for basic needs or necessities, but also for the purpose of basic wants and desires. All right. When we are talking about technology, students, we should also take in consideration the fact that technology is generally associated with improvements in terms of its efficiency with time. But we know, given humanity's track record, sometimes we can create things which can be detrimental if it is in fact misused or perhaps mismanaged or basically place it within your own hands. Now, in this video, I'd like to focus upon some of the impacts, the negative impacts, where we as human beings are in fact impacting upon the environment. Now, deforestation is in fact number one, all right, because when we deforest environments, we are technically using either certain heavy machinery and whatnot to forcefully remove the vegetative structure from the environment. Um, the falling of trees and whatnot can disturb the habitats, especially if these organisms are in fact arboreal in nature or depend significantly upon the actual physical structure of the vegetation for the purpose of food and also for the purpose of shelter. Fire is in fact a very significant component involved in the deforestation process. All right. This is in fact an image taken from Brazil in the year 2019, where the fires raged all the way up till 2020 in the first couple of months, as a matter of fact, and it destroyed significantly a very large section. The same is actually applicable to certain parts of Africa, the Congo Basin of Africa, as well as the bushfires associated with Australia. Now, deforestation is just a start because that is actually a precursor to other stuff to come. For instance, large expanses of land can be cleared for the purpose of agricultural expansion, especially for commercial farming, which is very impacting upon the environment. Commercial farming is in fact associated with very large parcels of land being cleared, where you will simply use heavy machinery and you will engage actively upon monocultural activities, which will simply involve heavy chemical fertilizer use, which would in fact contaminate the soils and by extension the groundwater. Also, these heavy chemical usage can influence negative impact upon the biota, such as the edaphic organisms or the soil-dwelling organisms, which can technically be outcompeted or potentially killed. All right, and this is actually a very important thing because they are fundamentally important in the cyclic patterns or the biogeochemical cycles within the environment in terms of the replenishment rates and also the rates of decomposition and stuff like that, and nutrient cycling. But at the same time, you should also take in consideration slash and burn agriculture associated with nomadic cultures, or I should say subsistence farming in many instances. All right, not necessarily commercial, but it's simply for the purpose of either subsistence or peasant cultivation to sustain the needs of small families and stuff like that. This slash and burn culture is very impacting upon the environment because it encourages also a deleterious effect and also destructive input into the environment where vegetative cover is in fact removed. Okay, industrial expansion is also a very significant component because in the developing world, right, industrial activities is in fact are in fact very pronounced. where resources can in fact be exploited, refined, and go through a phase where gaseous emissions as well as even waste associated with the aquatic and the marine environment, even land and even soil pollution can be associated. This essentially is to facilitate the growing needs and the demands of the increasing population. Looking at the image on the screen, we can see the expanse and the amount of lateral land space that is actually utilized, which simply means that these areas once were perhaps thriving habitats for organisms or animals within any given environment, but the industrial expansion actually fragments or basically push these organisms out of these geographical ranges. Folks, pollution is not only associated with industrial expansion and development. Pollution is not only associated with agricultural activities, but even in our own residential or perhaps within the confines of our environment or neighborhood, we can simply see that people can simply indiscriminately toss garbage or waste in and around the environment. For example, this area here where there's a lot of grass and shrubs, we've seen some bottles, plastic wrappers, you name it, and which is it is actually in close proximity to a water course as well, which is very distasteful to a large extent. Now, folks, we should remember one thing, and that is in fact highlighting the point that even if one individual decides to make a change, right, to basically to throw garbage from one area to the next, all right, that is per person. But what if the entire country, right, is actively engaged in such degrading effects upon the environment? All right, that is a very significant problem. All right, and it will contribute to more issues. We will talk about this in a different video, as a matter of fact. Another very important impact by us humans is that of poaching. Some of these animals are critically endangered and they are actually hunted and killed, right, for their horns, their tusks, their ivory, and stuff like that, and all for a paltry price. Hunting for the purpose of necessity is one thing, but this image here on the screen basically shows this particular individual who is in fact hunting for sport, hunting for trophies. What many people fail to realize is that these animals have a functional role, even in terms of providing ecosystem services for you and I. They are fundamentally important, even to a very small extent, but very critical in the whole global arena. And if we continue to poach and overhunt and kill these animals in a very pathetic way, there will come a point where we, human beings, will actually have to pay the price in terms of our interference upon the environment. Dam construction is also a very, very important aspect as it relates to affecting the natural processes of the environment. As a matter of fact, a dam is in fact a blockage, which basically reduces the flow of water further downstream. Now, there are in fact benefits associated with dams. They can be used basically as a flood control measure. They can also be used in terms of the energy generation, which is associated with hydroelectric power. They can also be used for storing water for the purpose of irrigation and also for the purpose of consumption for the population within the given geographical area. Now, this is a very classic case where damming a water course or a freshwater reserve can actually result in, apart from environmental problems, but also in terms of social problems as well. For example, Ethiopia, which is here, and Sudan, right? This large region here is Sudan. Both of them, they are planning to dam the Nile. This is the Nile River flowing in a meandering pathway all the way down to Egypt. All right. Now, this Ethiopia is in fact highland as well as Sudan and certain parts of Sudan. But if they dam the Nile there, obviously the flow of water is actually going to be a lot less. All right, as it basically traverses across Egypt, which means Egypt, which is already experiencing very disastrous effects of the dry desert-like conditions, extremely hot conditions, and stuff like that, they will be further faced with negative effects of even further drought-like conditions, right, which will technically affect their productivity as it relates to agriculture and even livestock rearing and stuff like that. So essentially, what I'm saying is that the damming of the Nile at Sudan and also Ethiopia will in fact result in a very large fraction of Egypt, right, to essentially be deprived of this fresh water reserve. Apart from the people, right, what about the animals? Basically, which rely heavily upon the freshwater reserve for the purpose of their survival, right? They can actually be subjected to the harsh conditions and they can actually succumb to the blistering heat of this desert-like environment. Just a bit of a fact, all right, it's actually year 2022 now. There is in fact well over 55,000 dams in the entire world, right? Over 22,000 actually exist in China. So that is a lot, right? And to a very large extent, there's a lot of disturbance upon the environment as well. Now, seismic testing or seismic bombing in some instances is in fact a very important component here because this affects the marine organisms and the marine environment at large. As you can see in the image, there are in fact shock waves generated by an air gun attached to a survey ship, and basically these hydrophones can receive the reflected energy, which is basically bouncing off the surface of the seabed, which below which you will also have oil as well as natural gas resources, which are prized or aimed for extraction. This is critical. Why? Because energy, right, travels, or sound, I should say, travels much faster in water. Many marine animals, right, utilize the concept of echolocation for the purpose of hunting and survival and stuff like that. And these deafening sounds at the bottom of the ocean can have a serious impact upon them, potentially resulting in these animals, many of which are in fact mammals, beaching themselves, all right, close to the shore. Nuclear explosions are in fact extremely destructive. As you can see, they are characteristically associated with a mushroom cloud. And these mushroom clouds can actually extend miles upon miles away. As a matter of fact, it is said that anybody who is within a 5 mile radius, right, can in fact experience third-degree burns, even at that distance away. Also, if you are looking directly at this particular explosion, you can actually suffer from temporary blindness if you are in fact safe distance away. But we must bear in mind, students, all right, that nuclear explosions are extremely destructive. All right, they can result in long-term effects with respect to radioactive materials being dispersed into the atmosphere, contaminating the waterways, contaminating the atmosphere, contaminating vegetation, to which much of them can in fact be completely obliterated, and the high temperatures associated with these explosions can be cataclysmic in nature. All right. Um, there are, in fact, numerous testing facilities throughout the entire world, many of which exist in certain parts of China, certain parts of North Korea. We also have the US, all right, the American Midwest, especially, and different parts of the world, as a matter of fact. So these are extremely destructive components which can devastate and destroy lives in a matter of, like, say, several seconds, in a blink of an eye. Now, look how magnanimous this is. Look at the mushroom clouds associated with the Tsar bomber, which is in fact a 50 megaton bomb, compared to the Hiroshima, which is only a 15 kiloton bomb. You do the calculation, you can actually observe that the Tsar bomber, which is the largest and the most destructive bomb ever created, in terms of the explosive power, it is in fact an estimated 3,300 times, or 3,300 times, much more destructive in terms of the energy which is produced than the Hiroshima bomb. Now, in terms of nuclear power plants for energy acquisition, these particular nuclear power plants in the world, there is in fact an estimated over 440, all right, nuclear power plants in the world, all right. Recently, there was in fact a nuclear meltdown where radioactive material was in fact spewed into the Pacific. The Pacific is said to be one of the most distinctive dumping grounds of radioactive material. In the year 2011, there was in fact a 9.1 magnitude earthquake which resulted in a tsunami which swept across Japan, which affected the Fukushima nuclear reactor, resulting it to experience a meltdown. All right, radioactive material, inclusive cesium-137 as well as iodine-131, were in fact released into the environment. These radioactive materials would contaminate the waterways, affecting the food resources as well as the animals, killing them in many instances, as also contaminating the land and the peripheral environments. Right, these are just a few examples of human impacts upon the environment. Yeah, in fact, many more, but I'm sure that more will be discussed in future videos. Any questions, feel free to let me know. Have a good one.